Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about science. Over the past few decades, leftists have been working on destroying pretty much everything worthwhile in our civilization, and now they're working on canceling natural law. But before I get to that, first I'm going to digress for a minute. The New York Times reported today, breaking news, astronomers have found a potential sign of life in the clouds of Venus, a planet long overlooked in the search for extraterrestrial life. Well, if scientists say they found life in these sulfuric acid clouds of Venus, it must be true. Just like in 1907 when the New York Times reported that Martians are probably superior to us, and they have a photograph of a scientist in a white lab coat, so it must be true. And then again in 1909, the New York Times reported that astronomers say that the Mars canals are for drainage. German says they're there to prevent floods when the pole caps melt. And in 1911, the New York Times reported, Martians built 2 immense canals in 2 years. Vast engineering works accomplished in an incredibly short time by our planetary neighbors. Wonders of the September sky. And the New York Times had a nice picture of a scientist and very detailed maps of the canals on Mars, which were built by our superior Martian neighbors. And 90 years later, scientists at NASA were still sticking to their life on Mars claim, even though they didn't have any actual evidence. Let's look at some other New York Times science. On October 19, 1958, they reported, some scientists estimate that the polar ice pack is 40% thinner and 12% less in area than it was a half century ago, and that even within the lifetime of our children, the Arctic Ocean may open, enabling ships to sail over the North Pole. There you have it, an ice-free Arctic within a generation of 1958. And a few weeks later, on December 7, 1958, the New York Times predicted a new ice age was on its way. That's some pretty fast climate change, going from an ice-free Arctic in October to a new ice age in December. But that wasn't the New York Times record, though. On February 20, 1969, the New York Times predicted an ice-free Arctic within a decade or two. And then 3 days later, on February 23, 1969, the New York Times reported that science was worrying about a new ice age. So in 1969, the New York Times went from an ice-free Arctic to a new ice age in just 3 days. That's got to be the fastest climate change in history. And right around that same time in 1966 and 1970, the New York Times announced that God is dead. So the brilliant people working at the New York Times determined that Martians are superior to us and that God is dead. Now let's get to the topic of this video. In the 19th century, an English scientist, Charles Darwin, developed the theory of evolution. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species, which explained a number of principles about how life evolves over time. He presented the principles of natural selection and survival of the fittest. The general idea being that when a population is under stress, only the strongest individuals survive and propagate. Thus, those with bad genes die off, and those with good genes prosper and keep the population healthy moving forward. Somehow, the New York Times and many other people on the political left determined from this that God is dead. Charles Darwin was the left's hero for 150 years, but now they're canceling him. The Museum of Natural History in London has determined that Charles Darwin somehow offends Black Lives Matter, and they've probably got to get rid of him. And if we look at Charles Darwin's writing, The Origin of Species, you can see why leftists are so upset. He said that climate plays an important part in determining the average number of a species, and periodical seasons of extreme cold or drought seem to be the most effective of all checks. He wrote, I estimated that the winter of 1854 to 1855 destroyed 4/5 of the birds in my own grounds, and this is tremendous destruction when you remember that 10% is an extraordinarily severe mortality from epidemics with man. So extreme weather and climate change in 1854 was causing mass extinction of birds, and they were having epidemics which killed 10% of the population, as opposed to the 0.01% in the current epidemic. This guy's gone way off the left-wing script. His idea of the survival of the fittest is just not acceptable to progressives. The left has replaced survival of the fittest with things like No Child Left Behind, where they lower everybody down to the least common denominator. The left believes that it's better for nobody to get a good education than to have some children get ahead of the others. Survival of the fittest and natural selection is simply not acceptable to woke people. And what about this idea of defending yourself and your family from attackers? Let's look at the latest thinking on that from the left.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to have to agree with you, Michael. Like, a cop is not a judge and an executioner. The cops are supposed to put their lives at risk to protect the people under any circumstances, even if it means they might die. That's the point of being a police officer, and that's not how they're trained anymore, or ever, as far as that's concerned. And he made a decision. He became judge and executioner in that same moment. Was he in the wrong? I don't know. Maybe not under lawful action, but I think that might be where some of the problem lies. Cops shouldn't just be able to shoot somebody in self-defense, and nobody should be able to shoot somebody in self-defense unless there's obviously I don't know. I'm just gonna watch the video. I'm not gonna really say too much on that.
So apparently defending yourself and your family is just plain evil. I wish that reporter would go tell it to this mama grizzly bear. I would love to see a video of that interaction. So the left wants to cancel Charles Darwin, they want to cancel survival of the fittest, and they want to cancel natural selection. Toto thinks that the left canceled their brains and their common sense decades ago. You can visit him on the web at realclimatescience.com.